time for one.
Okay, now you're live.
Right.
Okay. So welcome to the second presentation. Now, Ruth Macarthy will be presenting a research project about coordination of development and operation activity in Agile software development. Ruth, as soon as you're ready, thank you. It's yours.
Right.
I will mute myself, but I'm here.
Okay, so I am presenting on coordination of development and operational activities in Agile software development. And this is the research I'm doing on my PhD. I am in my third year now. So I've just finished my second year presentation. I'll talk about the motivation of the study, introduce the study, the motivation, the objectives, the research methodology, the research plan, the outcome, and the challenges. So as we are aware, the software industry is driven by the demand for faster deployment of quality products. And this is basically tied to the activities in software development. And these activities are interdependent on each other, and they need coordination. And the different software methodologies have evolved over time to address coordination. And DevOps is like one of the coordination strategies recently being adopted by practitioners. But we are aware also that in practice, methodologies are tailored, which yield varying results. And this is very true for DevOps because there is basically, at the moment, no accepted definition for DevOps, and the practices differ from organization to organization. So DevOps promises great values for people and organizations that adopt it. However, for organizations to transition to DevOps can either be successful or it can fail and be detrimental to the organizational operational stability and much more. So it can lead to loss of employees, can lead to financial loss. And reports actually show that over 75% of DevOps attempts fail in organizations for various reasons. Also from literature, the question of how DevOps should be deployed in organizations remains an unsolved challenge. All of this has motivated us to study DevOps, which is part of the work coordination strategy in software development. So our aim is to investigate the elements of influence in the different patterns of DevOps implementation in organizations and develop an adaptive model that will provide guidance for organizations in their DevOps or work coordination journey. So basically, I've already explained all of this. These are the things we want to do. We want to identify the approaches and the strategies organizations employ in their DevOps implementation. We want to understand the relationship between the elements that influence these approaches and strategies, and also develop and validate an adaptive model that will provide guidance to DevOps implementation. So for our research, we adopted the empirical case study approach, which is informed by grounded theory, data analysis. So basically, we decided that because it was difficult to determine the kind of organization we want to study, that is basically because you may not find people interested in participating in such organizations. So we decided for the unit of analysis to be software development practitioners that have at least 2 years of experience in using DevOps practices. And also for the second part of the study, practitioners and senior IT managers that have actually led implementation of DevOps in organizations. Primarily, we collected data through interviews, which was conducted over a period of 4 months in 2019, and then 7 months between 2020 and 2021. On a whole, about 25 practitioners from 23 organizations participated in the study, and they were from different types of organizations like financial and public sectors based in the US, the UK, Netherlands, and Africa. So for the end of the study, we are thinking of engaging in embedded case study to validate the aimed model. So basically, this is what we've done. This is the process we took to analyze data. We collected data through interviews, and then we went on to doing open coding, meaning that we didn't have preconceived codes for analysis of the transcripts of the data. So we read the transcript line by line and coded according to what we thought the practitioners were saying. So in phrases that would summarize their thoughts and their opinions. Thereafter, we looked at the codes and began writing memos. We constantly compared the codes and the memos to see what the relationship between the codes are until we got to a point where we thought we were not getting any new data, and then we began evaluating the data. We did this for 2 iterations. So the first part of the study, where we collected data for a period of 4 months, we engaged in this whole process and did that also for the second part of the study. This is a research plan. So first of all, we did a little review on the coordination of activities in software development. Because we were engaged in grounded theory approach, we didn't do so much of literature review, it was a light one. And then we identified the problem, which was improvement of coordination in software development. And then we focused on DevOps as one of the improvement strategies for coordination. So we went on to collecting data, which I've just explained, into iterations. And then the first phase of the data collection and analysis was based on the identification of DevOps implementation approaches. For this, we found 4 basic approaches to DevOps implementation in organizations. And then, and then we went on to the second phase, which was the investigation of DevOps implementation strategies and the factors of influence. For this, we discovered that literature basically focuses on things like the process, the culture, automation, and technology. But then we realized that the skills present in the organization or absent plays a major role to the strategies organizations employ to implement DevOps. So the next phase of the study will be to develop an adaptive model for DevOps implementation, and then we'll validate the model, summarize and write up the thesis. So this is what we've done so far. We've identified and categorized DevOps implementation and activities in terms of interconnection between the various teams based on the application deployment strategy, for which we presented a paper in the conference last year. So this is the summary of what we did. We identified the DevOps implementation according to the key players and then the environment of deployment, and also the activities of the different stakeholders in the development process. Secondly, we identified the functions. Okay, I just said that. And then for the second part, we identified 6 strategies of DevOps implementation, which is the platform, the greenfield, the monolith application, decomposition, the process improvements, cultural improvements, and advocacy. I know I'm almost out of time. So this diagram shows, the top part of the diagram shows the 6 different strategies we identified in the second phase of the research. The middle plane shows the 4 different approaches to DevOps. So we have not been able to identify the relationship between the top plane and the middle plane. So how organizations move from, say, platform to one particular team topology, or from cultural improvement to another kind of team topology, but there is a relationship between them from our research, which we've not identified. Also, we were able to demonstrate the relationship between the skill set and the DevOps implementation strategies on the top plane, alongside other previously established factors like technology, process, and culture. So presently, the the expected outcome would be the development of a model that will provide guidance for successful implementation of DevOps and the validation of this model through an embedded case study in an organization. Our present challenges are that although we aim to develop an adaptive model for which we are looking at things like the DevOps maturity model and seeing how we can modify this with the addition of the relevance of skill sets in the model. We have not been able to determine what quantitative metrics to employ for the validation of this theory. And then also the scope of the model application has not been determined. That is basically because the organizations we chose were not specific types of organization, but rather focused on the um, the practitioners that have engaged in these activities. And also, we have not been able to identify an organization that will participate in the validation. So basically, this is the whole presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you, Ruth. So let's start with questions. So is there any questions from the mentors? First of all, already any feedback?
I may have a question that is rather central. And so, first of all, Ruth, thank you for letting us be part of your research and the further plans. You central to your approach is that you are talking about an adaptive model that you want to provide. I would like to understand better what do you mean with a model and an adaptive model. So in the sense of what are the elements of your model, and is there also some kind of formalization that you will be using? What format will such a model have? And so maybe you can help us a bit with that understanding.
Right. So basically, that's what we are still trying to identify. So that's my current work I'm doing right now, to look at the different models in DevOps implementation, things like the maturity model, and see how that can be modified to include the skill sets. So basically, why we say it's adaptive is because there are different approaches to DevOps, obviously. So the model should be able to lead organizations to different approaches that would suit their specific context.
So may I ask an add-on question? So that with an integrated framework, basically, where you have the influence factors like technology, process, culture, and skill set, where you are putting a lot of focus on now, and that will somehow allow companies, organizations to derive implementation strategies for their
For
DevOps.
themselves, yes.
So it's rather this process from influence factor identification to recommendations, guidance, as you say, to implement a DevOps strategy.
That's the plan, yes.
Okay.
I have another question. Are you considering to use the socio-technical congruence measures? This measure can help you to see the difference between the coordination that a team or a company has and the coordination that this should have. Are you considering to use this?
No, I've not. But I've just written that down because I don't know what it means, basically.
So maybe you can read some papers by Marcelo Cataldo about coordination and socio-technical congruence, and maybe can help you.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
I also have some comments. Thank you, Ruth, for your presentation. And I read also your article in the conference. It is a very well-written article.
Thank
So
you.
I had some questions. These skills, does it have anything with the organizational form to do? For example, at what level does the decision is taken? Who is responsible for taking does the organizational aspect also play a role here? Not only the skills, but the form of the organization and the level of responsibilities and the autonomy of the teams or development environments to take this to select their strategy.
Yeah, I think there are other factors that influence the determination of strategies. But for our research, we want to focus on the skills. And I know that we can not do that in isolation. But then we also cannot look at all the factors because it will be really big to evaluate.
Mm. Yeah. Also, another aspect, I agree with you. Finding quantitative measures can be very challenging to do such kind of strategy evaluation and skill set evaluation. But what about choosing a path to find the outcomes of the strategies? For example, from you start from skill sets and then you come to the strategy, and there are factors like technology, process, and culture. What about the outcomes of this? As you have a feedback loop to the start, do you have any cases that you can see also the outcomes of the strategy that is selected?
I don't get the question clearly.
I mean that you start from a context. There is some kind of, for example, some organization, as you write, they select to develop a platform because they have the capability. Some others sit with a lot of legacy systems, so they choose the monolithic decomposition approach. So they
Yep.
select the strategy based on the technology and the skill set. But do they? What are the outcomes of this strategy? Have they done any evaluation? Was it successful or not? And what is the impact? Because you started with the question that many of the DevOps initiatives actually fail.
Yeah.
But how do you have the possibility to see in your cases the outcomes? So you have such kind of feedback loop to the organization?
Okay, so for the organizations we interviewed, the problem is they give us quantitative outcomes. So, for example, they basically follow the number of deployments, the frequency of deployments, the mean time to recover, and all of that as the metrics they look at. And I don't know how we can measure that by evaluating the impact of the skills.
I mean, the outcome is on the, do they see that, for example, that they have been barriers because they didn't have the skills that is required based on the strategy that they have selected? Do
Oh
they
yeah.
identify?
So for some organizations, we discovered that yes, they ended up spending so much time in trying to implement the particular approach they've taken, and some of them abandon it and